One day, he pulled the express to the station as usual. His fireman uncoupled the coaches, and he ran onto his siding to wait till it was time to go home. The coaches waited and waited at the platform, but their engine didn't come. A porter ran across and spoke to Gordon's driver. "The inspector's on the platform. He wants to see you." The driver climbed down from the cab and walked over to the station. He came back in a few minutes looking excited. "Hello," said the fireman. "What's happened?" "The engine for the express turned over when it was coming out the yard. Nothing else can come in or out. They want us to take the train to London. I said we would if the Fat Controller agreed. They telephoned and he said we could do it. How's that?" "Fine," said the fireman. "We'll show them what the Fat Controller's engines can do." "Come on," said Gordon, "let's go." He rolled quickly over the crossings and backed onto the train. It was only a few minutes before the guard blew his whistle, but Gordon thought it was ages.
Has there ever been a grander engine? Has there ever been one that carries such a legacy and distinction? Gordon is, and probably will remain, one of the most renowned engines on the Northwestern Railway. Since his arrival in 1924, he has been a shining star amongst the roster. With an expansive and vibrant past, there is much to discuss. So let's get started. Gordon's background is similar to Henry's, but I'll briefly sum it up. In the 1910s, the Great Northern Railway faced difficulties with its express trains. At the time, the railway's largest express locomotive was the GNR C1 Atlantics, an impressive machine for its time, but by now it was beginning to struggle with increasing loads. The railway's then chief mechanical engineer, Sir Nigel Gresley, set out to design a more powerful express locomotive, with the first attempt resulting in Henry. However, after Henry's performance fell short, Gresley took another shot, resulting in Sean. Sean was much more successful than Henry and was accepted as the official prototype, leading to the eventual production model. The first of these was Gordon, who rolled out of Doncaster Works in 1920. For the time, Gordon was a groundbreaking engine, significantly larger than the C1 Atlantics and significantly more modern. When Gordon was trialled, his performance was commendable, but his steaming abilities were found to be mediocre. Some even argued that Sean was a better steamer. Additionally, Gordon consumed much more coal and water than expected. Because of this, subsequent A1 locomotives were modified to address these issues. While Gordon was officially classified as the first A1 locomotive, he was regarded by engine crews as somewhat of an oddball from later models. This earned him the unofficial designation of A0-1, much to Gordon's annoyance. Despite this awkward classification, Gordon began working in revenue service, proving himself as a hardworking and reliable performer. He hauled some of the railway's most prestigious express trains. However, with the LNER's push for standardization, Gordon was set aside in 1924 due to his design differences. By that time, the production A1 had been established as the standard express locomotive, with 12 units already built and more on the way. The LNER could afford to retire Gordon, but rather than scrap him, they put him up for sale, hoping, albeit not expecting, that someone would take him on. After all, he was a large, unique, and ultimately costly engine to run. To everyone's surprise though, one buyer actually stepped forward. Topham Hatt, the controller of the Northwestern Railway. Desperate for a new express engine after the unreliability of Henry, Topham saw potential in Gordon. It was a risky investment, given the Northwestern's somewhat shaky financial situation, but Topham proceeded with the purchase. Initially, Gordon was relieved to learn that he'd been bought, but his enthusiasm waned when he learned where he'd be going. Sodor's main line is about 87 miles long, a decent stretch of track, but far smaller than what Gordon was used to. He felt insulted, having been removed from the heart of the UK's rail network to serve a much smaller population. Still, at least he had a home. Gordon arrived on Sodor in the spring of 1924. His relocation had been delayed slightly due to logistical issues. In his absence, Tyler had been loaned to the railway in order to handle express duties. When Gordon finally arrived, things went pretty smoothly at first, but that quickly changed. Gordon's authoritarian attitude did not sit well with the more humble Northwestern engines. Determined to assert himself, Gordon tried his best to prove that he was the best engine on the island, hoping to soothe the bitterness he felt over leaving the LNER. This authoritarian attitude is something that Gordon is often credited with pioneering. While traces of this persona had existed among engines before, Gordon was the one who truly solidified it. Naturally, this grated to the other engines, but none were more affected than Tyler. In Gordon's eyes, Tyler had briefly taken his rightful place as the main express engine, so Gordon made it his mission to outperform him. He also took every opportunity to belittle Tyler, though his efforts were in vain. Tyler simply went about his work, largely ignoring Gordon's provocations. Gordon's tense relationship didn't end with Tyler. His disdain was equally stronger, if not more so, for Henry. As mentioned earlier, Henry's performance issue had paved the way for Gordon's creation, and upon discovering Henry on Sodor, Gordon exploded with anger. He viewed Henry as a failure, an embarrassment to the Great Northern Railway and later the LNER. In Gordon's mind, Henry had broken the first rule of an LNER engine. An engine shall complete and excel in the work it's built for, prioritizing safety and punctuality. This rule, amongst others, had been established by Gordon himself. Yes, Gordon was the one who created the idea of LNER rules. To Gordon, Henry's inability to meet this standard made him unworthy of the LNER designation. And yes, Gordon was also the one who gave Henry the nickname the Great Northern Catastrophe. But Gordon would soon get a dose of humility. Just one day after his arrival, he stalled on the hill between Wellsworth and Marin. This stretch of track, known simply as the Hill back then, became infamous for catching Gordon off guard. When it was constructed in 1915, there had been a debate about what to name it. Topham jokingly suggested that it should be named after whichever engine stalled there first. And unfortunately for Gordon, he became that exact engine, and the section was officially dubbed Gordon's Hill. To him, this was a massive blow to his pride, an embarrassment even greater than Henry's failures. As if that wasn't enough, Gordon was temporarily demoted from express services and reassigned to haul goods trains, as a punishment to his poor attitude. Tyler resumed his position as the main express engine, further wounding Gordon's ego. This demotion violated another one of Gordon's LNER rules. If an engine is built for a certain job, it shall only do that certain job. This experience would humble Gordon, and he withdrew into himself, becoming a quieter, more reserved engine. Though he was eventually allowed to return to express duties, his attitude had permanently shifted. This more subdued version of Gordon persisted until 1930, when new engines arrived to the island. By then, Gordon had been struggling with the increased demands of the express services, which had seen a rise in ridership. Two engines were brought on for trials to help Gordon, Crovan and Alfred. Though they both were capable express engines, they couldn't have been more different. Crovan was kind, hard-working and easygoing, quickly bonding with the other engines. Alfred, on the other hand, was proud, rude and fiercely patriotic about the LNER. Naturally, Gordon gravitated more towards Alfred, who embodied the LNER ideals that Gordon held dear. Gordon admired Alfred for adhering to the 4 LNER rules, which I'll quickly mention. Number 1. An engine shall complete and excel in the work it's built for, prioritizing safety and punctuality. 2. An engine shall always be honest with others. 3. An engine shall only do the job it was built for. And 4. An engine shall prioritize the upkeep of the LNER's image. Alfred was punctual, brutally honest, focused solely on express work, and prioritized the LNER's image over everything else. In Gordon's eyes, Alfred was the epitome of a perfect LNER engine. However, cracks soon appeared in Alfred's image. Despite his record-breaking runs, suspicion grew over his arrival times, which seemed almost impossible under the railway speed limits. Gordon, blinded by admiration, overlooked the warning signs. As it turned out though, Alfred was not as honest nor safety conscious as he seemed, and his reckless behavior eventually led to a catastrophic crash. This event would shatter Gordon's faith in the LNER principles he once revered. His belief in the rules had already wavered beforehand, but now it was deeply shaken. A year after Alfred's accident, Reginald would join the railway as the 3rd express engine. This wasn't Reginald's first time on Sodor, however. In the late 1920s, when the Brendam branch was a part of the LMS, Reginald had been assigned to run express services between Brendam and Barrow. During that time, he and Gordon had already been introduced to each other. Though they weren't exactly rivals back then, their relationship had been uneasy. However, once Reginald officially joined the Northwestern Railway, tensions between the two engines escalated quickly. Reginald's arrival was seen as a challenge to Gordon's dominance on the express route, and matters worsened when Reginald managed to steal Gordon's express record shortly after arriving. This ignited a fierce competition, with both engines running the express recklessly in a bid to outdo each other. They pushed their limits, caring more about beating the other than about passenger safety. Things soon became dangerously out of hand, prompting Croven to step in and put a stop to it. He made his point by breaking both Gordon's and Reginald's speed records, capturing their attention. Afterwards, Croven had a serious conversation with both of them, explaining the dangers of their rivalry posed to the railway. Understanding the risks involved, both Gordon and Reginald agreed to set aside their rivalry. Instead of focusing who was faster, they turned their efforts towards running the trains efficiently, on time, and most importantly, safely. While not instantly clear on the surface, the rivalry had a profound impact on Gordon. Gordon would quickly realize that he had completely separated himself from the LNER rules. He wasn't prioritizing safety, he wasn't being honest with himself, he wasn't doing just his one job, and he wasn't contributing to the LNER's image with the predicament. After all was settled, Gordon decided that he would finally distance himself fully from the LNER practice that he had established, and worked on making himself a more tolerable engine. Shortly after ending his rivalry with Reginald, Gordon was called to London to fill in for another engine who had derailed shortly before departure. When Gordon arrived, he found the LNER largely unchanged, but his experiences had shifted his perspective. He now saw the authoritarian system he once upheld as stifling and counterproductive. The real and fatal turning point came when he met Carlin, a P1 goods locomotive who had taken over as the self-appointed leader of the LNER engines. Carlin enforced an even stricter adherence to the rules Gordon had once supported, and he'd even introduced a new rule, the so-called fifth rule of an LNER engine. One shall only interact with engines of equal status. This created chaos as engines became isolated from one another, and morale plummeted due to the lack of communication and respect. Gordon grew to despise this rule, seeing how it fostered a dark and hostile environment. He felt especially disheartened when he witnessed Eric, a young V110 engine, being harshly berated by one of Gordon's brothers, with no constructive feedback whatsoever. Gordon took matters into his own buffers, arranging for Eric to be transported to Sodor, where he could thrive in a healthier environment. Leaving London in a bitter mood, Gordon blamed himself for the system that had caused so much misery. He vowed to not return until the situation improved. Fortunately, Carlin's reign of tyranny ended after he destroyed some rolling stock in a fit of rage upon learning that Eric had left London. With Carlin out of the picture, Gordon's brother, Flying Scotsman, stepped up to lead the LNER engines, abolishing the old rules and restoring order with professionalism and common sense. Gordon, greatly relieved, returned to London in 1934 to celebrate Scott's 100-mile-an-hour run, happier than ever to see the positive changes. The rest of the 1930s remained relatively uneventful for Gordon. This was until early 1938, when a serious breakdown would sideline him. Persistent issues with his valve gear finally culminated in a major failure. To improve reliability, Topham and William Stanier would oversee a rebuild, replacing Gordon's troublesome Gressley valve gear with Walshart's valve gear and a new chassis. This transformation made Gordon much more reliable, and it was just in time for World War II, since World War II would break out shortly after. When World War II broke out, Sodor quickly went into defense mode. The Navy was put on high alert, and several of their vessels would patrol the Irish Sea and the Celtic Sea for German U-boats. With the threat of German air raids, several evacuations were carried out, with Gordon proving a massive help with these. Gordon would help any way he could, and his greatest contribution would come in form of troop trains. Despite the island being rather small, both in size and population, that didn't mean it sat on the sidelines, especially during the Allied invasions of Normandy. Sodor would provide 2,500 troops for the landings themselves, and a further 11,000 once a beachhead had been secured. That's 13,000 troops that had to be transported in a short amount of time. Gordon would temporarily stop running the Walden Wester in order to carry out these troop trains, of which Gordon would do many. In total, 15,500 Sudrian troops would be sent to Europe. Of these, 917 would perish on the battlefield. For their action, a memorial was established just outside Wellsworth. Gordon, having become close to some of them, can get a bit emotional when passing by. After the war, Gordon returned to regular duties, helping to rebuild Sodor while continuing his express services. The island had not suffered as much as the rest of the UK, but that's not to say it was left unscathed. The island had experienced a few air raids as part of the Blitz. These, and the rest of the war in general, had left the island in a pretty poor state, so a rebuilding program was initiated. Gordon's newly rebuilt form proved exceptionally reliable, which was essential in restoring the railway's operations. Despite having had several major achievements during his life, Gordon was soon about to carry out one of his most famous. In 1954, Duchess would bring the Sodor rail speed record up to 98 miles an hour. After that happened, everyone was starting to get a bit anxious. It was so close to 100 miles an hour, but not above. Topham eventually decided that it was about time to change that. By 1954, Topham had 3 engines who could realistically do 100 miles an hour: Gordon, Duchess, and Rebecca. But as a symbolic gesture, Gordon was picked for the run, much to his delight. A special run was organized, which would have the main line clear for a few hours so Gordon could attempt the feat. On April 18th, 1954, Gordon set off from Teignmouth to heavy fanfare. An estimated 2,000 people stood on the platforms of Teignmouth alone, and along the main line an estimated 140,000 people would line up to see Gordon pass. This run was highly anticipated, with expectations soaring through the roof. So, did Gordon live up to those expectations? Oh, he absolutely did. After entering the Crosby Straits at 88 miles an hour, Gordon would propel himself with all his might, quickly accelerating towards the mark. And not too long after, he did it. Gordon clocked in at 104 miles an hour, the fastest run by any Sodorian locomotive up to that point, and the only one to top 100. Gordon arrived at Vicarstown to enormous fanfare, with everybody celebrating the magical event. Ever since running 100 miles an hour, Gordon's life had been peaceful and active. He went back to running the Wild Wester, still proving to be very capable at the job. In 1964, the Peel Godred branch line was electrified and double-tracked, now allowing for services with a top speed of 100 miles an hour. It was during the testing of the new setup that Gordon's record would be beaten, with 112 miles an hour, which was an astonishing feat for Sodor. As a great symbol of his change in character, Gordon was actually at Kildane to greet and congratulate Howen, the engine who broke the record, a stark contrast to his former self, who would have resented such an event. However, shortly after, in 1966, Gordon would learn of the fate of his brothers. By then, all the LNER A1 and A3 locomotives had been withdrawn from British Railway service, and almost all of them had been scrapped. This was a deep blow to Gordon's mood, and he became rather depressed. Despite having a tense relationship with some of them, he still considered them family, and mourned the loss of them. In order to make Gordon feel better, Topham arranged for a special visitor to come to Sodor to meet him. The visitor in question was none other than Flying Scotsman, Gordon's only surviving brother. The two had a lovely time together, spending most of the days and nights chatting away. When Scott left, Gordon was in a much better mood. This, however, was again challenged in 1972, when Scotsman became stranded in the United States following a failed tour and the bankruptcy of his owner. Gordon was horrified at the idea of Scott being left abandoned in a foreign country. However, relief came when Scott was saved and repatriated to the UK. To celebrate this, Gordon made a trip to Liverpool in 1973 to reunite with his brother, a heartwarming moment that onlookers described as deeply emotional. In 2004, following the 50th anniversary of his 100-mile-an-hour run, Gordon would prove himself yet again by carrying out yet another 100-mile-an-hour run, this time topping at 105 miles an hour. Also in 2004, Gordon would be fitted with smoke deflectors, paying homage yet again to his brother Scott, who had recently entered ownership as part of the National Railway Museum. A brotherly bond you can never break. Isn't it poetic? 2011 proved to be a rather pivotal year for the North Western Railway. Up to then, there had been mounting pressure from several parties towards the North Western Railway's climate situation, and they were now being forced to phase out steam operations in favour of electric operations. This was something that Richard had, the controller back then, was heavily against. Eventually, he reluctantly outlined the idea to the engines, who, much to his surprise, were very supportive of the initiative, understanding the importance of the change. One who was very supportive was Gordon. As an almost 90-year-old wise locomotive, Gordon, as well as most of the other locomotives, saw the move as the best option to keep the railway afloat. With the engine's support, Richard launched the North Western 2035 plan, which set several ambitious targets for the railway to meet by 2035. Included in the proposal was the electrification of the entire railway and upgrading the Peel Godred branch to 155 miles an hour, thereby making it a high-speed railway. With all new electric traction proposed to be introduced, built at Crow and Skate, it was announced shortly after that Gordon, Reginald, Rebecca and Duchess had expressed interest in retiring from the Wild Wester once the new traction was able to enter service. While it hasn't happened as of 2024, it's projected to happen not too long in the future, with the new rolling stock soon to be tested. Gordon's readiness to retire in favour of the railway's survival shows just how far he has come from his younger days. From a proud, sometimes arrogant express engine, Gordon has matured into a respected icon for the Northwestern Railway, a beloved figure who will be remembered for generations to come.